Hey, what's up, everyone? Today, Bernie put out a policy proposal to put a tax on extreme wealth, and I'm going to read that policy to you. First, I want to give a quick shout out to the subreddit Sanders for President. It is the biggest and best subreddit for Bernie, and if you're not on there yet, I would urge you to join them today. And I also want to give a shout out to the user Listen to Hedges. He noticed my audio was not very good, so he sent me a snowball mic for free. So thank you very much, Listen to Hedges. All right, let's get into the policy proposal. So the issue is putting a tax on extreme wealth. In order to reduce the outrageous level of inequality that exists in America today and to rebuild the disappearing middle class, we must establish an annual tax on the extreme wealth of the top 0.1%. Signed, Bernie. Details. Today, the United States has more income and wealth inequality than almost any major country on earth, and it is worse now than at any time since the 1920s. At a time when millions of Americans are working 2 or 3 jobs to feed their families, the 3 wealthiest people in this country own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. Over the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a 21 trillion increase in its wealth, while the bottom half of American society has actually lost 900 billion in wealth. In other words, there has been a massive transfer of wealth from those who have too little to those who have too much. For the sake of our democracy and working families all over America who are struggling economically, that has got to change. In order to reduce the outrageous level of inequality that exists in America today and to rebuild the disappearing middle class, the time has come for the United States to establish an annual tax on the extreme wealth of the top 0.1% of U.S. households. This wealth tax would only apply to net worth of over 32 million and would raise an estimated 4.35 trillion over the next decade. Anyone who has a net worth of less than 32 million would not see their taxes go up at all under this plan. The revenue raised under this plan would be used to fund Bernie's affordable housing plan, universal child care, and help fund Medicare for all. All right. How the tax on extreme wealth would work. This tax on extreme wealth would have a progressive rate structure that would only apply to the wealthiest 180,000 households in America who are in the top 0.1%. It would start with a 1% tax on net worth above 32 million for a married couple. That means a married couple with 32.5 million would pay a wealth tax of just $5,000. The tax rate would increase to 2% on net worth from 50 to 250 million, 3% from 250 to 500 million, 4% from 500 million to 1 billion, 5% from 1 to 2.5 billion, 6% from 2.5 to 5 billion, 7% from 5 to 10 billion, and 8% on wealth over 10 billion. These brackets are halved for singles. Under this plan, the wealth of billionaires would be cut in half over 15 years, which would substantially break up the concentration of wealth and power of this small privileged class. Under current law, the IRS is already required to assess the net worth of the wealthiest Americans when they pass away to calculate the estate tax liability. A federal wealth tax would require the IRS to make the same assessment on an annual basis for the wealthiest Americans. Steps would also be taken to streamline the process for purposes of the wealth tax. For assets that are difficult to appraise, the Treasury Department would have the option of allowing taxpayers to have appraisals done periodically instead of annually. The Treasury Department would establish the average rates of appreciation for several classes of assets. Those appraised only every few years would be assumed to appreciate in the intervening years at the average rate established for their designated class. Assets placed in a trust would be treated as owned by the grantor of the trust, parentheses, by the person giving assets to the trust, close parentheses, until that person's death. A wealth tax is enforceable. In order to ensure that the wealthy are not able to evade the tax, the proposal includes a number of key enforcement policies. First, it would create a national wealth registry and significant additional third-party reporting requirements. Second, it includes an increase in IRS funding for enforcement and requires the IRS to perform an audit of 30% of wealth tax returns for those in the 1% bracket and a 100% audit rate for all billionaires. Third, the wealth tax includes a 40% exit tax on the net value of all assets under $1 billion and 60% over $1 billion for all wealthy individuals seeking to expatriate to avoid the tax. Finally, the wealth tax proposal will include enhancements to the international tax enforcement and anti-money laundering regime, including the strengthening of the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. A wealth tax is constitutional. Since 1916, we have taxed the inherited wealth of the richest people in this country through the estate tax. For more than 100 years, we have taxed investment income from capital gains and dividends. In order to reduce extreme inequality, we must also establish a tax on the net worth on the top 0.1%. Bruce Ackerman and Ann Allstott, two highly respected Yale law professors, have both written in support of a wealth tax on the richest Americans in this country. Here is what they wrote for the LA Times on September 20th, 2011. In the United States, anti-tax zealots will try to use the Constitution to cut off debate about a wealth tax before it begins. Article 1, Section 8 grants Congress plenary power to impose any and all taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. But it contains a special limitation on capitation and other direct taxes. Under this little-known proviso, such taxes may be imposed only if they are apportioned among the states according to their population. This provision was part of a compromise with the slaveholding South, and its intention was to prevent the North from imposing a head tax on slaves because this could not be apportioned equally among the population of all the states. Given its origins, this provision has consistently been construed very narrowly by the Supreme Court, which has found only head taxes and real estate levies to be within its scope. Given this history, it is extremely unlikely that the injustices will cite the founders' original compromise with slavery to bar a tax that would serve the cause of economic equality and democratic legitimacy. The Roberts Court may be conservative, but it is not quite as reactionary as all that. Many more articles, including a very recent one published by the American Bar Association, make the unambiguous case for the wealth tax's constitutionality. Demanding that the wealthiest Americans pay their fair share isn't radical. The reality is that we already have a wealth tax in America, the property tax, and it disproportionately impacts working class families. One of the biggest sources of wealth for middle-income families is owner-occupied homes, which are taxed in most states at rates that can be as high as or even higher than 1%. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the wealth owned by the top 0.1% of Americans is not housing or real property and is not subject to any sort of property tax. This proposal would ensure that assets owned by the top 0.1% are taxed the same way as much of the wealth owned by the middle class. As much of the wealth owned by the middle class is already taxed. All right, so there it is, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Critiques, if you think it's spot on, let me know what you think. And as always, go Bernie.
As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless sky.